Good morning, and thank you, Tony. I'm very grateful to have been asked by Zachary and the steering committee to give this presentation as a keynote. I'm very pleased and impressed to see the diversity of presentations that we have had and that we know are coming in this symposium. It's an interesting mixture, and I hope that this perspective will add to that and be thought-provoking. The fisheries historian Tim Smith from the US has said that the history of an event or of an institution is the sum of the histories of the individuals who are in that event or in that organization. And with that in mind, I would like to start this talk with a bit of a history, a personal sort of reflection on how I have come to this point and how I see the ECOKNOWS project and the lead up to this meeting. And then I'd like to end with some forward-looking ideas about the challenges of the future. So I hope that this will be challenging for you. So if I start recording, and then go from beginning, I should have it. So this is a presentation, ECOKNOWS in context, but there is a subline in this, and that is auditing human activities in the ocean. And I will return to that partway through the talk. 100 years ago, just now, the Canadian government engaged the preeminent fisheries scientist in the world of the day, Johan Hjort, to come to Canada. He actually came for 2 seasons to explore for fisheries on the Scotian Shelf and in the Gulf St. Lawrence. And they put at his disposal the Canadian survey ship, the Acadia, shown here, and another vessel for this expedition. There you see in 1915 Hjort with the captain of the Acadia, Calder. Hjort is on the left. And attached to this expedition, it's not changing. Do I need help with this? Okay, we'll try that again. Okay, the survey ship, the Acadia, and Hjort on the left with Captain Calder. And attached to this expedition was the young A.G. Huntsman, a graduate of medicine who had been employed by the Canadian government to work in fisheries. He was in fact the first permanent employee of what became then the St. Andrews Biological Station. And Huntsman had been to that point a descriptive seaside biologist. And when he was working with Hjort in this Canadian fisheries expedition, he became interested in the herring fisheries, even more interested in the herring fisheries. And in fact, in the link that Hjort was trying to make at the time between fisheries and their environment. And in fact, it was the Canadian Fisheries Expedition that changed Huntsman from a descriptive biologist to what we would recognize today as a fisheries oceanographer. And in fact, set Huntsman out on a trajectory of several expeditions of exploration in Canada, which are pivotal and which are impressive even to this day. And I think it's fair to say that expedition 100 years ago really established the forerunners of much of what the Canadian Fisheries Research Board and the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans has done since. And it was about herring. Until that time, the herring fishery was exclusively a coastal trap fishery. Herring were caught in coastal traps, herring weirs, the old one shown here. More modern ones still exist and are fished to this day. So this coastal fishery. And there was the thought, sorry, there's something wrong with these slides. There was the thought that there was larger herring resources, which in fact were shown to be true. And this developed into a mobile herring fishery, which has been quite predominant in fisheries research in Canada since. Flash forward to 46 years ago, less than 50 years ago, where there was the thought in Canada that the fisheries were underexploited, that the herring fishery the potential of the herring fishery was huge. And in fact, a conference in 1966 made the statements that we should be making fuller use of the great herring stocks that were at our doors, the expansion already initiated, and the obvious need for better knowledge of the resource and how to exploit it to the best advantage of our people. And that there was optimism in the undoubted fact that they're not even approaching full exploitation of the herring resource. And that herring fishery, with the herring purse seines especially, but also the ware fishery, continues to this day to provide a variety of products, including canned, frozen, roe, smoked product, and so on. The trajectory of this herring fishery is interesting. This time of development following the Canadian Fisheries Expedition, with a peak in about 1970 and then a very dramatic decrease since that time. And the interesting phenomenon of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and its predecessor, the Canadian Fisheries Research Board, of encouraging development on the one hand, and then of restricting development since the 1970s. And my involvement with this fishery began 30 years ago when I was hired as a researcher in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And in all of my time, since 1984, it has been a time of restricted development, of restriction and of an increasingly elaborate fisheries management regime. Now, there's much could be said about this last 30 years, but some of it that is of relevance to this symposium includes the development of our thinking and of our methods during an increasingly restrictive management regime. When I started, this was largely a biological exercise. We were largely looking at the productivity of herring in terms of what could be taken biologically and justifiably the next year. It was essentially about the population dynamics of herring. Since that time, we realized the need for a thought of a rather larger set of biological objectives, including not only productivity of the target resource, but also biodiversity and habitat. More recently, social and economic aspects, and the realization very recently that society expects more of our management than the minimum that is established in law, and the need to obtain and maintain social license in this fishery. I'll return to that in a bit. In fact, we were managing not fish, but a fishery. We were managing the humans, not the fish. We all know that. Right? And that this was a more challenging environment than the biological one that I've been hired to work on. I set about with colleagues, including Dan Lane, to move from straight biology to consideration of the fisheries system. And in the period 15 to 20 years ago, we were producing things like this: the need to include fisheries science with fisheries management and with social and management science in something that we called at the time fisheries management science, formally incorporating some of the techniques of social science and of management science into fisheries decision making. We pointed out that the stock assessment process and management advice and management implementation process at the time was a very linear one, in which there was a lot of effort put into stock assessment and the fisheries science, peer-reviewed advice and so on. But that advice was handed to decision makers, and then it became a political process in which there was externalities that were driving the system. And that better for this system would have been something more circular, in which the fisheries management advice included biological, socioeconomic, operational, and industry considerations of assessment and viability and feasibility, and a formal risk assessment from which there could be advice alternatives to decision makers, fisheries management, and some feedback to that evaluation process. The need for a more holistic approach to advice and to decision making. Also in that 15 to 20 year period, there was a celebration here in Helsinki, the celebration of the successful defense of Sakari Kuikka's thesis, Uncertainty Analysis in Fisheries Management Science, Baltic Sea Applications. And in the first paragraph of Sakari's abstract, he talks about the fact that the precautionary approach, including rules for both risk management and risk assessment, has started to feature more prominently in international fisheries agreements. Put simply, the precautionary approach is a construction of risk-averse decision rules. Therefore, realistic examination of uncertainties is coming to be an important component of fish stock assessment. And it's of course fair to say that Sakari's thesis set the seeds for several things, including this ECOKNOWS project. About the same time was one of several symposia or meetings around the world on the idea of confronting uncertainty and of risk in fisheries systems. This is the ICES report of the ICES Symposium that was held in 1998 in Cape Town, South Africa. And in that, several observations, several conclusions. First, that fisheries management systems must embrace and account for uncertainty explicitly. That we needed formal, rigorous decision-making, and that we could learn from operations research and management science in that. That we needed to collaborate in articulating objectives, specific objectives, clear objectives. That we needed a change in governance, and that this was and they use the words meta-discipline, it was an interdisciplinary process, and that we should look to implementing management procedures and to the evaluation, the formal evaluation of management performance. So these things were in the period 15 to 20 years ago. And indeed, considerations of that have continued. Sorry. 5 years ago, flash forward then to 5 years ago, where I was asked to help develop an experiment in Canada of bringing together the fishing industry and government and academia in collaborative research in order to address some very practical and specific aspects of fisheries. The background for this is that in Canada we felt that we were short of capacity. We needed to work together. The problems of the fishery were great, and we needed to bring to the table the combined talents of industry and academia. Were largely seen as being removed from practical fisheries work, and government. And we needed to do this in collaborative ways on critical questions of importance to the industry and to management. Industry priorities set the scene for this collaboration, and they were summarized here. The need for research in sustainability, on social acceptance, on the evolving ecosystem-based management, on socioeconomic viability, and on fishing community well-being. In other words, a sustainable industry in a changing landscape of management. The network vision is very, very bold, and several members of the network are here, and several of the other presentations and posters are resulting from that network. But the vision is bold. It's to reshape fisheries research in Canada by bringing together these three groups, industry, academia, and government, establishing close and meaningful collaborations based on co-constructed research projects. In doing so, to train a cohort of students and associates who will be able to work across these boundaries in future, and thereby, over time, to improve the sustainability, viability, and competitiveness of the industry. Now, we've just passed the midterm review of this network, and indeed it is a success. It's a large and growing collaboration of numbering more than 170 people. 50 of them or so from industry, 30 academics, 40 government, about 50 students and postdoctoral fellows, all obtaining this unique experience. We have a diverse set of research projects, some of them being described in this meeting, on priorities that have been identified by the industry. We've learned things about close collaboration, about the importance of co-construction in collaboration, and we've established a good basis for discussing national research themes and the need for and how to explore interdisciplinarity in Canada. We're starting now to think of the future and to articulate some of the priorities for the future, for future research. This ECOKNOWS conference is interesting. It represents the accumulated research of the ECOKNOWS project plus associated case studies from elsewhere in the world. And I think it's very interesting to look at the range of the themes in this symposium. Fisheries management under uncertainty, decision modeling in fisheries management, probabilistic fish stock assessment, oil spill and eutrophication risk analysis, environmental risk assessment for marine areas, and risk analysis in aquaculture. This is a diverse set of topics brought together under this banner of uncertainty and risk, and the need to develop techniques to deal with uncertainty and risk. And that brings me to the forward-looking part of this talk, which I've titled Auditing Human Activities in the Oceans. And I use this phrase because I think in order to guide us in where we need to go methodologically and in terms of our work, we need to think about how we will be evaluated, how we will be audited going forward. And I've tried the exercise of thinking 20 years down the road, what will we look back and suggest we should have done at this point in order to maximize our chances of being successful down the road? If we look to the litany of our literature in this field, we see several things. Constant barrage of examples of the failures of modern management, of challenge of climate change, of evolving international agreements and national legislations regarding sustainability, of the need for management with respect to a larger set of criteria and higher standards, co-management, integrated management, ecosystem approach to management, etc. We also see examples of unintended consequences of our management, of fish stock collapse, of environmental degradation such as ocean acidification, of overcapacity and corporate ownership of fisheries, of collapsed coastal communities. All of this in spite of, in many countries in the world, very elaborate fisheries management schemes. I think this is a pivotal point and a sobering point, the unintended consequences of a well-intended and elaborate fisheries management regime. If we were to look objectively at our resource management of recent years, to do a report card, a self-evaluation of that, I think we would say that there's been considerable recent positive evolution. We've developed things like the ecosystem approach that's trying to improve our management. But there are still some things missing. There's insufficient consideration of cumulative effects, for one. There's a lack of consideration of, and of definition even, of the full suite of conservation, social, economic, and institutional goals that we should be using to guide us in management. And there's no structure in most places in the world for consideration of trade-offs among objectives. In other words, there's no consideration, or there's no structure really, to achieve sustainability. Specific criticisms of current management, and this is a Canadian example, but I think it's similar here. Activities are being managed by different groups using different tools, standards, and approaches. There's insufficient attention to the full suite of values, especially social economic aspects. There's insufficient consideration of cumulative effects. There's a perception of a lack of transparency and a lack of participation in management. And there's insufficient public appreciation of the trade-offs among activities when decisions are made. Now, if you look at this and think about it, some of these could be solved with the existing structure. We could be more transparent, for example. We could have more people participating in our evaluations. But most of these cannot be solved with the existing assessment and management structures. They require a change in governance, a change in structure. So I think there's some writing on the wall, if you like. And what is that writing on the wall? That international agreements, and in my case, Canadian policies, require consideration of more diverse values in management. We need to include more things in the mix. That management must consider holistic systems. We can't do it on bits anymore, or just on bits. That the context has to be one of risk evaluation and management. That those being managed and the public demand higher standards, greater consideration, and greater participation. And that we need to integrate ecological, social, economic, and institutional aspects in our evaluations. The conclusions of this sort of a little bit of reflection are that the landscape and evaluation and management, the landscape of our evaluation and management is changing very quickly, that our activities are going to be evaluated or audited against a greater set of criteria and higher standards, and in relation to cumulative effects. And if you think about it, this poses huge challenges for us, for management, for industry, and for science. It requires new and different approaches, new tools, and new fora in which we apply those tools. Now I'd like to step back to a case study again to emphasize this point. This is the case study of the management of fisheries and other activities in the Bay of Fundy, where I live. From this chart, you see overlap of activities, quite a busy part of the world in terms of ocean use. Fisheries, aquaculture, transportation, some protected areas for species. This is the summer habitat of the right whales, and so on. A busy area. And it's also an area in which there has been very definite overlap and conflict between the traditional herring weir fishery that I mentioned early in the talk and an emerging industry for salmon aquaculture. And a group in that area, under the auspices of the Southwestern New Brunswick Marine Resource Planning Initiative, was asked specifically if it was possible to develop a plan to reduce conflict between these two activities, to organize marine activities in space in order to overcome some of this conflict. There's a very interesting case study went on it's been going on now for 8 or 10 years, with some major observations. First of all, of course, there is competition and conflict for space. But more than that, this group realized quite quickly that many of the things that were valued were currently not being considered adequately in management. That they needed a more diverse set of objectives in order to manage activities in this space, reflecting what they called community values, and that these values needed to be applied to all activities in an open, transparent, and participatory way in order that there could be a process for trade-offs among these activities. What are these community values? The things that the community care about. These are the goods and services and valued ecosystem components of the literature: environmental, social, cultural, economic, institutional. And I think it's a big challenge to determine how do we define, quantify, provide advice, and manage a diverse set of values like this. It includes the habitat, the organisms, but also the activities of this area. The Marine Resource Planning Group in that part of the world is still trying to articulate a list: protecting habitat, natural environment, protecting against pollution and cumulative impacts, preserving biodiversity, but also things like preserving heritage, traditions, equitable access, maintaining community health and well-being, promoting local employment and prosperity, financial self-sufficiency and sustainability. Quite a diverse list. Now, within the Canadian Fisheries Research Network, there's one of the projects, in fact, a project that I lead, that is looking at the requirements of emerging ecosystem-based and integrated management approaches. And it's doing it in this way. It's looking from a review of Canada's policies and obligations to the development of a comprehensive set of objectives and performance indicators, and then evaluation of what information is required for those, and of the consideration and training and capacity development that we might require to implement those. And it is purposefully an interdisciplinary evaluation. Several social scientists and students of social scientists are involved in this collaboration, along with industry and government. And that group has come up with in response to an evaluation of Canada's policies and international obligations, it's come up with a comprehensive list of the objectives that one would suggest be included for a more comprehensive view of sustainability. And then we're looking at the information requirements for that. So we're looking at a framework for including these, and also some case studies in which we're trying to test some of the performance indicators associated with this. That's another story, but it is an example of the need to, or what would happen when you start to consider the broader set of objectives of this more comprehensive management. And I've tried to think ahead about what it would take to implement this more holistic set of objectives. And I think in Canada, the way this is likely to happen is in response to three sets of evaluations or of audits. First is that our individual plans, management plans for various activities will continue to grow and to expand. Fisheries will continue to have individual plans, aquaculture, energy, transportation. They'll all have plans with an increasing set of objectives. In addition to that, we can expect further development, I think, of this market audit of certification, which is with us now and I think shows no sign of diminishing. I think we'll have that going forward. Thirdly, and more speculatively perhaps, but I assume that there will be an evaluation of cumulative performance of all of these activities in an area like the Bay of Fundy or the Gulf of Maine. I assume that sooner or later we're going to try to look at how we've done with respect to the evaluation of all of the activities in a cumulative way. So we'll see further development, I predict, of national management plans, thank you, of marketplace certification, and of these cumulative or ecosystem assessments through the guise of marine spatial planning, integrated management, something like that. Now, if you accept that something like this will develop, or something close to it, then I think we can anticipate the need for some sort of regional umbrella plan in which this expanding set of objectives is articulated comprehensively for an area, and this set of objectives would then be applied across all plans in an area. So I think it would work, but it requires a modification to our governance, perhaps something that is unique to this area, although I think it is perhaps more widely applicable. This background suggests that we need to think forward in terms of some research that would be required for what I've suggested, or something analogous to that. And I suggest there are 4 types of profitable research areas, or important research areas. The first is in integrating ecological, economic, and social aspects in applied decision support, risks, and trade-offs. We see a lot of evidence for that in this meeting already. Second is evaluation of cumulative impacts of multiple activities in relation to coastal communities and livelihoods and economy. I think we need to get beyond fisheries to look at fisheries and other activities as part of coastal communities. Fisheries as one of many activities in an area that need to be managed, if not together, at least in some way consistently. And that we need a fora in which we can undertake policy and management alternatives and evaluation. And my own suggestion for this is that a useful banner would be research for coastal economy, or for coastal livelihoods, or coastal communities, that we need to think across activities, across academic disciplines, and with several levels of government, about bringing these together in research that will allow us a more comprehensive evaluation of alternatives for human activity in the coastal zone. And so I leave with you this challenge that to ponder as we're listening to the talks and reviewing the posters of this ECOKNOWS Symposium, and as we think about what might follow a project or collaboration like ECOKNOWS, what would be the next logical, methodological banner in which we should be working. And I suggest that it should have activities along this type. Research for coastal economy, or something like that, involving a broad set of players. And with that, I will end my talk, and thank you for your attention.